Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 27 Degree with Chris and Nancy from 27 Degrees Consulting. Our guest today is Reverend David Lima, who's joined us to discuss suicide prevention. Before we begin our conversation, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Bay Coast Bank. Bay Coast Bank is just right for all of your financial needs. Visit baycoast.bank or call 508-678-7641 to learn more. As always, you can support the 27 Degree with Chris and Nancy by signing up as a patron. Go to patron.podbean.com/the27 Degree. Or you can click on the link on our Facebook page. $5 per month gets you a shout out, bonus content, and access to Basement Bites, which are my music videos, and a behind the scenes look at taping before and after the show. You can find the 27 Degree across social media, including Facebook, Instagram, and your favorite podcast platform. You can also subscribe to the 27 Degree Consulting channel on YouTube. I'd like to give a thanks to Ron Gamache for our intro music and EBM Studios for producing our show. So first, let's just talk generally about suicide and the scope of the problem. And here's some statistics from the Centers for Disease Control, and these are very sobering statistics. So suicide is the 10th leading cause of death overall in the United States. It claims the lives of over 47,500 people per year. It was the second leading cause of death among individuals between the ages of 10 to 34, and the fourth leading cause of death among individuals between the ages of 35 and 44. There were nearly 2.5 times as many suicides in the United States as there were homicides, which is something I was surprised to find out about. I would have thought that would not be the case. And in 2019, the suicide rate among males was 3.7 times higher than among females. In males, it's 22.4 per 100,000. In females, it's 6 per 100,000. So obviously, there's a huge problem here, and we're here to discuss that. And I'm not even sure that these statistics really give us the full sense of the scope of the problem, because I am sure there are people who die of unknown reasons that are actually suicide deaths, one car accidents, etc. We really don't know the full scope of the problem, but obviously it's huge. So without further ado, Reverend David Lima, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this and your interest in it.
Well, thank you for inviting me onto the show. And interest, it's like anything else. Sometimes it's not what you think you'll ever be involved with, and or doing with your life. I am a minister, a non-denominational church, small non-denominational church out in East Freetown, and I've lived in the South Coast all my life. My actual city that I live in is New Bedford all my life. But I've worked all across here. I've worked here in the Fall River. I've worked in a variety of places in a variety of ways. I became a minister back in '89 and went full time in the ministry back in '93. And like I tell a lot of folks, no, I'm not a social worker. I'm not a doctor, which you would think these are the types of people that would be involved in suicide prevention.
Right.
I am the chaplain from the Bedford Police Department, but part of that all comes from the fact that I'm involved in the community. And the biggest thing that people just sometimes don't understand is that when it comes to families, usually their minister is their first responder. When it's, obviously a medical condition is not what they stop to think, but mental illness for families is not always considered a mental condition. It's considered a behavior.
It's not considered a medical, right? I see what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Bad behavior, even when it comes to drugs and alcohol, it's bad behavior. It's What people don't realize is that all of these things can stem from a mental behavioral issue. Some of it is undiagnosed. And so what ends up happening is that family members will come because of a loved one or a close friend. I don't know what to do, and they got bad behavior. Now, for us ministers, especially when it came to drugs and alcohol, we use the old fire and brimstone routine. Do you know what you're doing to yourself? Do you know what you're doing to others? What we ended up realizing is that there was a lot that we didn't know, because most people know they didn't know. They are having their difficulties and they don't fully grasp what's going on. And so, again, I touch on both because, as you stated, we don't fully know exactly how many are suicides because we've come to understand that a lot of the overdoses may actually be a planned suicide.
And that's a point I didn't even bring up. That's a great point.
And some of it is some of it can be, as they can do a forensic, discovery in terms of the psychological aftermath when they do that, not just the physical, talking to family and friends, things like that. And so we got involved with helping in the local schools after a Columbine-like threat. And what we come to realize is that the schools didn't have a lot of counselors. Now they're starting to recognize they need more counselors in the schools. But at the time, there wasn't a lot of counselors. In fact, there wasn't a lot of money 20 years ago for a lot of this. But the ministers were offering to come and just be a presence. Most of us, in fact, the first real year that we got involved with that was the first year that we won the World Series in a series of World Series that the Red Sox won. We were coming in wearing Red Sox gear, but we were caring adults that were able to talk with the children and just have lunch with them, and just how you doing, things like that.
Non-threatening.
Very non-threatening. Come to find out, we were talking as much with teachers that were having issues as we were with students. And so I was approached by a member of the school system about putting together some suicide prevention type coalition. Because I've already started doing community work. People were recognizing me. They thought that an outside voice could do it. Because, again, a lot of entities, government entities, schools, they don't want to bring up suicide because they think to talk about it will increase it.
A common myth. We'll talk about some myths later on, but that's a very common myth.
And so this particular person who was heading counseling was striving to get some resources and everything else. And everybody was kind of like, no, don't talk about it. Push it to the side, everything else. But New Bedford had, like many other communities have had, and thank God when I say many, I don't mean, it happens all the time, but New Bedford had what was referred to as a cluster. And that's when you have some of the same demographics, people with the same demographics in a short period of time taking their own life. And we had 5 students in a 22-month period of New Bedford Public Schools that had taken their own life. The oldest was 15. The youngest was 11, and it's like, why? And so because of that relationship we had with the schools, we would get called in to help with trauma response. Whenever you hear about a school or an entity that has crisis counselors were called in. Well, we were working with the schools as backup crisis counselors. They would do it first, but some people, they want to see that minister. They want to see the comfort of seeing the priest with his collar or the rabbi with his yarmulke, or a minister that they've seen. Because for some kids, that gives them a little bit of certainty.
And then it's a comprehensive approach. Like, you have a slew of people. If this one doesn't fit the bill or work for someone, you have the backup to that and the backup to that.
And that's the most important thing for me in all the aspects of the work that we do. It's there is no one cure. If there was, then we wouldn't have half the problems we have, because you'd just be able to concentrate on that. For different people, different issues, you need that different approach. And I think that's one of the things that if we don't get across to your audience more than anything else is the idea that you have to be a professional in order to stop someone from suicide. Suicide is the most preventable death. It's the one thing that you get taught early on from the CDC, mass public health, all this. It's the most preventable death. All we got to do is intervene, and half of it is just being there. In fact, there's a national campaign that's called "Be There." Just be there. Being able to intervene, because that's the issue. It's almost like a perfect storm moment when somebody actually takes their life or make that attempt. So
you make a great point, because as a physician, there have been unfortunately cases in my career where patients have taken their lives, and when you think back and you look at those situations, many of them I really had no idea they were even depressed or had mental health issues because they didn't bring it forward. But someone who families know these things,
right,
sometimes even more than we know as clinicians, because if someone comes in once a year for a visit and they don't bring these things up, or we ask and they're not forthcoming with the information, we have no way of intervening or knowing. But someone who's around a family member or a friend all the time, it's harder to hide that consistently, I would think, at least. So there's a great opportunity, and as you say, you don't have to necessarily be a mental health professional. There's a great opportunity for people out there to intervene and make a difference.
right.
I think too, it's hard for people to come forward and say, "This is what I've been thinking about," because there has been a stigma related with that.
Very much so.
Right.
And for instance, and again, sometimes I intertwine substance use and alcohol with what's going on. If I've got an issue and I need it,
Right.
You're a doctor, medical doctor. Somebody comes to you. If they got high blood pressure, we know how to deal with it.
Right.
If I've got heart murmur, we know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
I'm actually having an issue right now with my lower back, and I've been going to see the doctor for a month and a half, and there's things that can be done. These are all things that we, say, oh, gee, I hope you can get through it. Are you sleeping better? Are you bringing your blood pressure down? Are you doing this or that? If I say, I'm just afraid all the time.
Yeah.
Well, what does society say? Well, suck it up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or what are you afraid of? That don't scare me. We all of a sudden don't fully grasp sometimes the mental aspects of life.
Right.
Now, all of us experience anxiety. All of us have experienced depression. I experienced depression after the Celtics lost. It was depressing. After the Bruins lost.
Right.
I'm a sports fan. But that's just human nature. That's something we care about. Lose a job, you're going to be depressed. But there's a difference between something that is temporary and something that becomes clinical.
Yeah.
Something that becomes deep-seated, deep-rooted. Something that triggers maybe something that you've experienced in the past. Right. And so now it's that anxiety that takes it to another level.
Sure.
But when we say we're afraid, we've all experienced being afraid. We've just not experienced being afraid 24/7 for weeks and months at a time.
Right.
And the same thing with depression. So society doesn't always understand and empathize.
Right.
Sometimes we criticize, and that's where the shame and stigma comes in. Same thing when somebody is using alcohol and substance to self-medicate.
Yeah.
That's
very common. I see that all the time. It's not uncommon.
Well, how many of us have a bad day?
Yeah.
I can't wait to go out tonight and have a couple of belts.
Right.
Right. Have a future. Oh, my margaritas are waiting for me at home.
Right.
Or whatever. I'm gonna, I just gotta loosen up. What a bet. We think like that, do things like that, and again, for most of us, it doesn't take it into a clinical situation.
Right.
But for some, it does.
With some, it can be a slippery slope, and then once you start down that path, it can really escalate. But I think what's really interesting about what you're mentioning is when you talk about the stigma, you look at these suicide statistics for men. So what's the difference between men and women? So women will talk about this stuff and men generally don't talk about it. That's one reason. I'm sure there's other issues that account for that. But I find that interesting that, I think as men, we're not as equipped to talk about, feelings and how we feel and what's going on mentally and all of that. And I wonder if that's a big part of it. And there is a big stigma with men, like we have to be strong, right? We have to be the ones who, I mean, maybe not the newer generation, but our generation, right? There was a lot of that.
Well, there was a lot of that, like I said earlier. But let me give you another one. And don't get me wrong. These days, it's not uncommon for if you're married, have a spouse, have a partner, that your wife may make more money than you do.
Right.
But traditionally, usually, it's at least at even par, if not the husband's making more. So there's a financial need. Yeah. Well, you can't let on that you got an issue because the boss might think, I'd be better served letting this one go. Right. So now there's the fear of losing your job. If you have to go and stay a week or two, a month for a clinic, number one, it's not necessarily recognized by insurances. Most people's insurances, you can go unlimited time for a cardiac problem or a cancer problem. If you got a mental health issue, usually your medical insurance says 10 visits.
Right.
That's right.
I mean, it's really sad, but you're so right. I mean, mental health benefits in this country are really the resources out there. Not only that, this is something that always amazed me too. I have a patient who comes in and they need to be admitted for let's say an alcohol detox program or whatever it may be. If I want to send someone to a cardiologist, I have my secretary call the cardiologist and make an appointment. If I want to get someone into an alcohol detox program, that patient who also already is having difficulty coping with life and issues has to reach out on their own. They won't allow us to make the appointment for them to go in for most programs. Very interesting. So we take people who are already struggling and we put another barrier up. The insurance companies put another barrier up. No, you have to do this yourself and reach out. And some of these folks have difficulty doing that.
And if there's beds available.
That's a whole other issue. There's no beds.
Limited
psych beds are limited. We've talked about this before. It's a real issue. Our society has to look at this differently. They need to put the resources into mental health.
So I just want to go back to something that you said that was very important too, and it's our initial response to someone that can be so flippant.
Yep.
And probably we should list kind of some things you should never say to someone, like.
Well, let's do a little role play. All right, so this is great. Let's do this. So
who's going to be the insensitive one?
I'll be the insensitive one. I'm actually good at that. So no, I'm really not. I'm very sensitive. But you're a depressed friend, and you're coming to me for help.
So I've just had it. This day is just horrible. It's been this way for a week. I just can't even get out of bed. I'm glad you're here today, but I don't think I can even talk to you today. I'm just not up to it.
Nancy, I mean, you've got to just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're going to be fine. All right. Look, tomorrow's a new day. Wake up. You'll be okay. It's going to be just fine. I mean, so that's my take on it. I just don't think that you don't have to worry about this. You're going to be fine. All right. Just tomorrow will be a new day.
I don't know. I've been having these thoughts and I just I'm in a dark place and I just don't know what to do.
Well, go out, let's, go out and do something enjoyable and, that'll change your mindset. You'll be all right. Really.
Okay, fine. That's what I'll do.
So what Nancy did there, she shut down because I'm not really, I'm not listening to her, right?
Not listening necessarily.
And I'm. What else am I doing?
You're offering solutions that may have nothing to do with what her needs are.
Yeah.
And part of it is the need to just be heard.
I'm kind of patronizing.
You are patronizing, and that's one of the problems that does happen with people. They may think, I can't handle this, so I don't want to deal with it. It's almost like they're thinking more about themselves, whether they realize it or not. Don't want to make a mistake, so we make a mistake, so we don't make a mistake.
Yeah.
And I think if I'm going out of my comfort zone and actually verbalizing to someone that I'm in a dark place, like that's a huge step for someone to take to even be able to say that.
Yeah.
And I know, like, when I had darker days, I do my undercover calls is what I call them. So it's not a call for help, but it was a call just to connect with someone.
Right.
So it might be, hey, what's going on lately? But it's just hearing that person's voice that is soothing some of my other needs. So I'm not coming directly out and saying something, but I think you will probably talk about the importance of connections and relationships.
Connections is the biggest thing. It's definitely the biggest thing, because again, when someone starts feeling suicidal, and let's be clear, not every scenario is the same scenario. So this doesn't necessarily apply to everybody, but to most.
Right.
The biggest issue is when we start to isolate ourselves and we're not sharing, we're not talking. So even your, as you just referred to, undercover calls is making a connection.
Right.
And the more connections we have, the more ability we have to talk things through, even if we're not being totally open. Okay. One of the things that we've got to learn how to do as human beings also is to listen.
Yeah.
Right.
To be able to listen without interrupting and giving you solutions. Okay. I don't have your solution. I don't know exactly your problem. But if I'm able to hear you, now you're able to verbalize it. Now there's two people listening. It's not just the person you're talking to, it's yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And sometimes we're not really verbalizing. We're not really considering. We're just in a, as I refer to it, as a washing cycle. We're just spinning it around. You ever have a hard time going to sleep because you're worried about something? It's the same thought over and over and over. Sometimes verbalizing it with somebody else, you're able to start coming up with different solutions because you're having a conversation.
That's a great point.
And so
let's try this again, and I'll be the depressed one, and you use some of those tools, those listening skills, because you're a good listener.
I think that the Reverend is better equipped.
All right, let's do it that way.
Role playing. Oh, jeez.
All right, okay, sorry. So Reverend, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just not feeling that good. I don't know what to do anymore. It's like I feel like worthless. I feel like I don't enjoy anything anymore. I'm so stressed out about how do I support my family. I'm really insecure. Financially, I don't even know what to do anymore.
How long have you been feeling like this?
I don't know. It's a long time. I just really haven't wanted to bring it up with anyone. It's so hard to talk about this because I just want to be able to, do what I should do as a man and support my family and be strong. I mean, I think if I think back, it's probably been months, but it's just gotten to a point I have to say something.
What, have you mentioned it to anybody?
No, you're the first person. I can't even talk to my wife about this stuff.
Why are you concerned about talking to your wife?
I'm afraid that she'll look at it as, I'm weak and she won't, she'll look at me differently. And
I understand that happens a lot for us men. We do have that place where we, society has made us, you got to be macho, you got to be strong, you got to be the pillar. But sometimes pillars need repair, and sometimes we need to be able to do that. If you and your wife have been together all this time and you guys have a deep love, I'm sure that she would have a deep concern and not necessarily be. And so.
But I don't want to worry her.
I understand, but you're worrying yourself.
Right.
And if she was to see you having this much concern,
right,
it would probably worry her more. And doing it alone is never good. So what is probably your biggest fear? And this is how you would do it. You'd start trying to draw just one thing at a time. It's not to have to be overwhelming,
right.
but just being able to let the person articulate,
You know what I realized I do all the time that I should never do? I jump right to the solutions that are in my mind.
Right.
Yes.
And I skip, I guess, that whole listening point.
When you guys did the first role play, one of the things that you had said was, well, I've been there. I get through that, no problem. You could.
Yeah.
You did, but you may not have the same set of circumstances. Yeah. One of the things that we sometimes nullify people's feelings is, or just don't acknowledge them, is when we say, well, I've been through that. That's fine. Right. I got through that. No problem. I've experienced that. And if you want to share that, I experienced a little bit of what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I was able to get through it. How do I help you? Right. See, again, you take it back to the person, not about how you did it, because you don't know exactly the depth of what somebody's going through.
Right. So what I did with Nancy is I invalidated her feelings. I kind of made them like, these aren't really important. You'll be fine tomorrow. Just,
right.
Go to bed and wake up in the morning. It's a new day, which obviously depression is much deeper than that.
Yeah. Now, for some people, what one person is going through is nothing for the other person. Absolutely nothing. Right. But, in my office, I have my son used to draw.
Okay.
School, a lot of drawing. And he in Saturday morning cartoons, back when Saturday morning.
Sure, when they had those.
Foghorn, Leghorn, and
right.
And
Wile E.
Coyote, but Foghorn, Leghorn, and the Chicken Hawk that was always chasing him.
All right.
And my son drew a picture where the Chicken Hawk is about to grab Foghorn Leghorn. Now, if you remember, the rooster was like 10 times the size of the Chicken Hawk. That was the joke. The thing would always do damage to him. But my son drew it so that you had the little Chicken Hawk, but his arm and hand extended. It was a very big hand that was bigger than the throat for the thing. And he says, that's what reminds me a lot of what you do, Dad. You help me see things that I don't see.
Yeah.
And for me, it was perfect. I called it perspective. It still sits in my office. Because if I don't have your perspective, what you're feeling, what you're perceiving, then I don't fully grasp it. That's why we have to talk with people and allow them to talk. Yeah. Do more listening than solution building.
So I think that's a good point. I mean, when you're having a conversation with someone, particularly about these very serious issues, you should do more probably listening than talking, because I think it's an automatic response, and this is a human response, and maybe even more a male response, that we want to fix it. So 30 seconds or 10 seconds into the conversation, you already have the solution for the person. So if you look at, for example, when patients go to physicians, they're usually interrupted within about 10 seconds of their opening discussion. We want to have that solution right away. And sometimes the solution is really, like you say, listening and hearing the other person rather than just coming up with a quick fix, kind of armchair psychiatry, so to speak.
And one of the biggest things that you'll find in a lot of different people's literature that deals with mental health, or deals with these things, it's okay not to be okay.
Right.
It's okay, because we all experience that. Now, the one point that you did bring up that we do need to address is when you did say, I'm in a dark place.
Right. I wanted to bring that up too.
One of the things that we have to learn how to do, and we usually try to avoid it, is how to be direct.
Yes.
When somebody says, I'm in a dark place, we need to ask.
Right.
I'm going to break here.
Right.
And I think it's a good place
to break
and then come back
Sure.
with that very conversation.
Great.
So why don't we go ahead and break for our 30-second commercial.
Primacare is Southeastern New England's trusted leader in medical care. With offices in Fall River and surrounding communities, we're dedicated to your well-being. Our carefully selected team of more than 150 providers offers world-class primary and specialty medical care. Primacare doctors are supported by a skilled staff trained to deliver comprehensive radiology, imaging, and testing services. Primacare is large enough to take care of all your medical needs, but small enough to care for you personally. Primacare is by your side.
At much higher rate.
That's interesting. Okay, so we're back. Chris and Nancy, 27th degree, and we're here with Reverend David, and we're talking a little bit about suicide. And I think right now we should talk about some of the misconceptions about suicide and some of the things that we may be afraid to talk about or ask when we're dealing with a person who is depressed. Do you want to take this on, Nancy, or do you want me to go through some of it?
And before we launch into that, I'm just going to follow up with the conversation we had right before break, where you had isolated what we had said in that role play about being in a dark place.
Right.
So,
And I think with some of the things you're going to be talking about some of the myths of suicide.
Yeah, well, that gets to the first myth, really. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
The bottom line is you don't want to back off of it. You
Right.
want to actually push into it.
Yeah.
You want to be able to draw it out, and the person may be reluctant, but you want to persist. But it's a good persistence, not a come on. You can't drop that on me and then walk away. You got to be able to empathize. You got to be able to realize what you're doing. When I'm saying that, you got to show somebody you care.
Right.
That's the biggest thing. And when somebody makes a statement like that, you were right. Sometimes they're putting themselves out there in a very vulnerable way.
What's the backup
And a lot of discomfort. It's an uncomfortable position to put yourself in.
Exactly.
Right.
So what's like the backup to me that's like, oh my God, I'm getting it over my head with this conversation. Like I'm thinking of the crisis number,
Well,
but like,
let's go through your myths, then we'll talk
So
about that.
the first myth is that asking someone if they are suicidal may put the idea in their head. And that's a common misconception that I hear that people have. So when I see someone in the office and they're depressed, right out front, I'll ask them, have you thought about, are you thinking about suicide? Are you at risk of hurting yourself? You have to ask that. But there is this conception that people have, or misconception, that if you ask that, you're going to push the person in that direction.
So you're right. It is a misconception. Okay. Right. You're not, by your asking the question, going to push anybody in that direction. I will, though, correct you, Doctor.
Sure.
Because you did ask the question good the first time. Then your second question was the one I'll tell you never to use again.
Okay.
All right. Don't ever ask somebody if they're going to hurt themselves or thinking of hurting themselves. When somebody, human nature, human psyche, we have since the beginning of time had fight or flight.
Yep.
We want to live. In order to overcome the desire to live, where if a danger comes, we're either going to fight it or we're going to run from it. You got to go through quite a bit, reach a dark place, reach a very difficult place where you can overcome that to take your own life. Usually that means a person is in a lot of anguish.
Correct.
Physical, mental, even spiritual.
Sure.
They're already hurting.
Right.
Suicide is a permanent solution. This is, you'll hear from every course that you ever take on suicide prevention. Suicide is a permanent solution to what is usually a very temporary issue. Okay? It's a perfect storm moment. When you say to somebody, you're not thinking of hurting yourself, they're thinking of ending the hurt. Okay? So you do want to be direct.
That's a good point.
You do want to be direct. You want to ask someone, you're not thinking of taking your own life. You can do it a little bit indirect and say, some people, when there is much difficulty as what you're going through, they think about just going to sleep and never waking up again.
Right.
It's a way to lead into you're not suicidal, are you?
Right.
But again, you got to remember how you say that, because just in the you're not suicidal, are you?
No.
Comes across as a judgment.
Right. But the way that you said it, I think, is a way I use sometimes. Sometimes patients in your situation or this scenario feel that they want to end their life. Do you have those thoughts? That's a great way to bring it up.
It's exactly, because you want to be direct. And, going back to that myth that it might push somebody in, it actually, for many people, actually gives them the ability, gives them permission to be able to release something that they've already been thinking about.
Right.
I talk about it as blowing up a balloon. If you're, you start having the pressure, it just keeps building up, all that pressure. If you don't do something, eventually that's going to blow. On the other hand, just carrying a little pinhole, just releases the pressure. It gives the ability for somebody to now let it come out. If you're in a safe place, always do this either alone or with only one or two other people who care. Okay. because you never want to put a person in a place where they're going to get embarrassed in a group.
Makes sense.
Always make sure that if you're going to talk to somebody that you're caring about like that you have time. The last thing you want to do is you got an appointment, all of a sudden that gets dropped. You've got to make a decision to stay with the person,
right.
And talk it through, because sometimes we amplify the problem by walking away, and the person just, it validates to them. I'm trying to spare my soul, and they just walk away. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
Well, if I'm gone, who's going to miss me? Nobody's going to miss me. So you want to be able to always keep those things in mind.
You want to make sure it's a private place. If you have a pager, that it's, it's off, cell phone on vibrate, not answering the phone in the middle of it, all of that stuff.
Right.
So
right
true.
Now, that's the person.
They need to know they're the priority.
Yep.
Right. Do you want to hit the second one there, Nancy?
Yeah. So the second myth: a mention of suicide is not serious enough to require help. So I guess, like, in my mind too, like, can something like that be just flip that? You don't address it like, I'm just going to kill myself. You don't care. And
again, it goes back to something the doctor said earlier in the program. If you're only seeing a person once a year, as in a doctor visit, okay, then you don't know enough of the person to know that there's any kind of change going on in their life.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If you got somebody who regularly offers up threats, either internally or externally, then there's a habit there, and it's because they got a bad behavior that needs to be addressed. But if you got somebody that's making a statement like that that's never been like that before, then it's a statement that you need to take some notice of, and maybe not immediately call 911, but you need to be able to start having some conversation. It is about changes. Whether somebody seems to be getting into a darker place, more isolation, pulling back. Hey, where's Dave? He used to show up all the time. We haven't seen Dave in a while. Somebody needs to call Dave.
Yeah.
Now, maybe Dave found some other friends and he dumped us. Who knows? That's happened to all of us at one time.
Sure.
But maybe Dave is just going through something and doesn't know how to deal with it and has withdrawn from everybody.
Right.
That's when we reach out and we just look to talk.
That's a great point, though, that people may not necessarily approach you and say, I'm feeling badly. It may be that you notice things as a family member or a friend. You notice a change in their behavior such that they're just not available. They're isolated. They don't want to be involved anymore. Things of that nature, and that can spark a conversation to delve into that a little bit more.
Yeah,
Reverend, when you're dealing with school-age children, and we have a suicide event that happens in the school, does it make the kids think about that more as an option for themselves?
So that is always a concern. Yeah, and that's why you need to address things when things happen. That's why schools, especially schools, will always have response, so that people can come in and talk with the kids, whether it's counselors and people that are trained in one form or another. We've done that many times. I've been here to Fall River for things that have happened in the past, and we set up programs, to help with the initial response, the initial making everybody aware of it. I've been in places in schools where we've had counselors available for 2 or 3 days, and you'll have the kids that will be released to be able to come see the counselors. We'll have the teachers, custodians that have come to see the counselors, and some of them, they're just looking to get out of the class,
Right.
But some of them are really have a need, and that's where in a lot of the things we do, and again, going back to a question you had earlier, suppose I get in over my head. Well, never allow yourself to get in over your head. It's not about you fixing the person. It's not about us becoming the doctor. It's about us being the bridge to getting the person to that next place. Okay.
I mean, everyone can listen. Everyone can learn about resources that are available, but we're not psychologists or psychiatrists. I think that's what you're saying.
Definitely.
So, we have to realize that.
But we can all care.
We can all listen and we can all care.
Right. And you may not, we may say, oh, you need to get some help. No. One of the things that we should do, can I help you get some help?
Right.
Can I get you? Like, why don't we try to find somebody that can talk to you?
Well, that's what I was getting at earlier. I mean, if you put it in someone's hands who's already struggling, it's hard for them to reach out and get that help. You have to really assist them physically.
It does. Now, I'm not going to toss the hospitals, the clinics, all them totally under the bus.
Right.
I do believe that that's an issue between insurance companies, government, and providers.
It is.
But the fact of the matter is, we used to have mental hospitals in this country.
Right.
That we ended up finding that we were just putting people away for putting them away.
Right.
And we were stacking and racking and putting them like, boxes on a shelf.
Right.
And they weren't getting the best care, and we weren't hiring the best people, and there was a lot of abuse. And back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we ended up throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
And we closed everything. And now we're having to rebuild the whole system again.
We've gone from one extreme to the other, unfortunately.
And so the big thing that we have to recognize is that the way the insurance pays and the way clinics get paid, and it is costly. These things are costly. Is if the patient goes and stays. Okay, now if you got a 5-day detox, if you're trying to come out of just getting the drugs out of your body, if you're going in for a 30-day rehab,
right.
If you're having to go for a clinical work with your mental health,
right.
Or behavioral health, that could take 30-60 days, unless for some reason you have been mandated by a court issued order.
Yeah.
The day after you show up, you can walk out.
Right.
And so if you take up a bed and then you walk away, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of these providers, they want you to make the call, the person, the patient, not the doctor. The doctor knows the need, the doctor sees the need, but the patient's going to be willing to go.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the insurance companies
make it very hard.
But, and I see that point, but it does make it very hard for people who are impaired for, because of their, whether it be a substance abuse issue or a mental health issue. It's very hard for them to reach out and do that. It really is.
Hard.
Yeah.
It's extremely hard because most don't recognize they have that issue.
Exactly. Can I ask you a question? Because I'm very curious with the children you work with, for the ones that have committed suicide, is there a common denominator? Are they bullied? Do they have what are the do you have a sense of, like, is there a general issue, or are they all different? Is every person different?
I don't think there's any one sole issue,
Okay.
but I do think that one of the things that we have come to understand is a place of hopelessness.
Okay.
Whether it's real or just their point of view. Their point of view is their reality. Their perception is their reality.
Yeah, that's all that matters.
So, we've seen where it's happened in I've responded in my 20 years to some of the most richest homes in the area.
Mm-hmm.
In a child that from the outside looking in, it appeared had everything.
Right.
Yeah, this issue definitely transcends socioeconomic lines.
And
sure.
I've also been in a place where one was an 11-year-old was living in public housing with multiple family members, and he had been bullied. And it wasn't a continuous campaign, but he was slight. He was. It was something that happened in the neighborhood, something that happened in school, and nobody saw it coming. Nobody saw it coming because, again, we don't always stop to talk to our kids. Did you get your homework done? Did you get this? Did you do that? Did you get your chores? And stop sulking. We sometimes tend to not have conversations that we should have. Yeah. And that's one of the things we have to do.
Well, it comes down to we often don't truly listen to people.
No, and that's what I was saying. It's not about what we can say sometimes; it's about what we can hear.
Right.
And hearing with the right heart, not with, as you stated before. I've been good at that most of my life. My wife, as you also stated, doctor, my wife will start telling me that there's an issue, and and I'll, halfway through her sentence, well, that's easy. We can just do this,
Right.
this, and sometimes, she'll say, just shut up and listen. I don't want you to fix it.
Right.
I want you to hear what I'm feeling about it.
Right.
And so that's some of the things we've got to do.
That's a male thing. We tend to try to be fixers, and sometimes we just have to listen. And the outcome, the goal is not to fix something necessarily, but to listen to the other person. I'm not talking about suicide in general. I'm just talking about communication.
Yep.
Communication. Those are some of the barriers.
I kind of want to jump to, in our last maybe 10 minutes that we have, just recognizing the warning signs and taking action. So a few that we have that we've researched is showing dramatic mood shifts and talking about being a burden to others, expressing hopelessness, feeling trapped like there is no way out, acting reckless, increased use of alcohol and other drugs, sleeping too little or too much, withdrawing from friends, family, and society. And then some additional warning signs would include having a peer or friend who has died by suicide, suffering a recent humiliation or embarrassment, like we've just talked about.
That goes into the whole bullying issue. Yeah.
And their quality of schoolwork is decreasing. And then when we look at actionable steps, some examples of what we can say when we're having these conversations are, I want to help you. Please tell me what I can do to help. I am here for you whenever you want to talk. I'm here to support you, not judge you. And I'm sorry I didn't realize you're in such pain. So you've touched on some of these things, but knowing the experience that you've had and the interactions that you have, are there some things you would like to highlight?
Well, again, I think the biggest thing is pattern change. If all of a sudden a person changes what you're accustomed to from them,
right,
that already is telling you there's something going on. Now, it could be something good, but it could also be something bad. And especially if you see the behavior, that's getting more negative. One of the things that you brought up is also goes in the opposite direction. If somebody all of a sudden their schoolwork starts to decline, but it can also be their schoolwork gets so much better.
Really? How come?
Same thing at home. Your capability of handling your business, your bills, your things start to decline, or all of a sudden get so much better. Somebody who's got thoughts already going through their head want to leave better memories.
That's very interesting. I never thought about that.
Want to leave better. Want to leave what they're leaving behind in a better fashion.
Okay. So it's truly you're looking for those changes.
You're looking for changes of personality, changes of pattern. Okay. And yes, the words of encouragement. I'm here for you. I'm that. This. Or encourage them to talk to somebody. Again, I can talk to a lot of people, but not everybody's going to talk to the minister. Not everybody's going to talk to the police chaplain. Not everybody's going to talk to, an older guy, an older white guy. Okay.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's about, just asking people. So who's somebody that you look up to in your life? Who's somebody that has been in your life, that you trust, and especially in school, there's usually a teacher, a counselor. Sometimes it's the custodian.
Yeah.
Literally. Okay. You just want to make sure they're, a trusted, and you want to emphasize those words.
Mm-hmm.
A trusted adult. You don't want to send them to somebody that you don't know.
Sure.
But you encourage people to share. Say, I'm afraid what they're going to think of me. I am afraid. Well, I'm not thinking any different of you. I care about you.
That's
and other people care about you.
Right.
You want to give people the hope that they may be losing. To tell them that it's not a shame to reach out. It's not a weakness, but a strength.
Right.
And I'll say this also before we finish. People have asked me, because this especially with kids, sometimes, most of the time, there are signs.
Mm-hmm.
We may not recognize them all, but we may get concerned, but we kind of blow them off. But sometimes kids actually know. The same thing with adults. They're afraid to say anything to anybody.
Right.
Because if I say something, Dave has got issues, but if I go and tell on Dave, Dave's not going to be my friend no more.
Right.
And
Right.
I've addressed this with kids. I've taught this. I've taught the course that we teach to 200 kids in an auditorium. And I'll ask people, number one, when you ask the question, how many of you have been touched by suicide? Know someone, had a family member, had a friend, had, almost all the time, at least 2/3 of the hands will go up. But then, would you share something if you were worried? Now, some will say yes, and some will say no. And I'll ask them why. Well, I don't want to lose a friend. I says, well, but if they die,
Right.
you've lost a friend. I says, I'm gonna tell you my choice. My choice is I would rather lose my best friend who's angry with me and never wants to talk to me again, but he's alive to be angry with me, than to know that I could have said something to somebody and maybe prevented them from dying. Now, we're not God. There are going to be times we're going to do everything right, and it may still happen. There may be times we do hardly anything, and it might stop from happening.
Right.
But anything positive is
Right.
still going to help somebody, and that should be our biggest goal.
Right.
Can you share with us a story or a specific experience that you've had, that you've seen something that was a really bad, dire situation turn into something that had a positive outcome?
I could. It's been a few years, and we're not in the area where it occurred.
Sure.
But I once got a phone call. I won't tell you exactly how the relationship existed, but a wife called me that the husband had called her from work. She was working at a place that was 45 minutes away from home. He was despondent because he'd lost his job. He, unknown to her, because it was a traveling job, had started consuming large amounts of alcohol. He didn't do it as much at home. He'd get drunk maybe once or twice, but apparently he was consuming large amounts of alcohol. And he'd called her, and he told her that she better call her mom because their child, which was an infant, was upstairs in the crib, and that he intended to take his life before she got home. Don't come into the basement, just have somebody else. She called me. She knew the things that I did. We had had a long time relationship. To tell you that anybody had ever saw this, couldn't. I hadn't seen them in a while, but because of the new position and things, the way life had changed. Long story made short, I got somebody that was close to him and went to see him. He had his rifle. And we went in. I was able to get him to give me the rifle. Okay. Now you may say, well, this is not something I tell anybody to do. I've had training. As a chaplain with the police department, I've got a bulletproof vest. But I also knew this person. And I felt confident that I could intervene. Once I had the weapon secured, we sat on the floor in his basement for over an hour. And we talked and talked. But now I was at a place where I had to make a decision. When it's something like this that had gone that far, he was doing better. We were laughing. He started showing us some things that he was doing. in his workshop. But then I told him what I was going to have to do.
Yeah.
And I told him, I says, I need to go with you to the emergency room. I says, I need you to check in. I need you to be checked out.
Right.
And he's like, well, I don't need that. I says, you do. And my position, I am mandated. I'm mandated to make
Correct.
these reports. I says, you got a child upstairs. You got a wife. And you came very close. Now, whether he would have and wouldn't, we'll never know. But the thing is I told him either he was going to come with us or I was going to call 911. And he ended up coming with us. Again, that's how far I was willing to go. I'm not telling anybody that's watching or listening that that's what you should do. When it's that much, you probably need to call 911. But in this particular case, I didn't want to see it escalate. I wanted to see, what we could do. And if we couldn't, then I would have called 911. He ended up angry with me when I went and visited him again, because now he was,
sure,
being held. And he was upset because now he was actually being told he couldn't come home because of the safety of the family until he cleared some hurdles. So he was upset. But the fact of the matter was, he ended up getting treatment. He ended up getting some assistance. And probably took months, if not over a year, before he ever sent me a thank you. I wasn't looking for a thank you.
Right.
The bottom line is he needed to get some assistance. We needed to make sure his family and he was safe.
Right.
Now that's an extreme example.
Right. But I think it's a good point that sometimes people are so in the weeds with where they are that they don't have that perspective that we've talked about.
Right.
It's something we got to care.
Yeah.
We got to care in society.
Right.
I'll tell you, and this is, as I know we're getting close to the end, but one subset of people that we need to be paying more attention to, that especially during the pandemic and with all the isolation, is our elderly.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Our elderly need us to reach out. And sometimes it's, you don't want to be with your grumpy in-laws or with your,
right.
Your parents who have high expectations. And I can't be here every day. But, sometimes walking away doesn't help. And if all of a sudden something occurs, and there's higher rates happening now with our elderly.
Yeah, the isolation that the elderly have suffered, and not just in nursing homes, but in the community, has been really striking to this pandemic. And we see a lot of health issues that occur, not just mental health issues, but physical issues, because they're not taking care of themselves and they're not being checked in on. It's very sad. It really is. Is there a message you want to leave our audience as we close? A statement or a couple statements or points that you want them to keep in mind?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that if you are a caring person at all,
right,
you can help. If you see somebody who is struggling and you think, well, I can't help them. Well, maybe you can't, but maybe you can be the key that gets them to the help they need.
Right.
And a lot of times everybody is not in a place where it's dangerous.
Right.
But some people, if we intervene earlier, if we just care about people earlier, just ask people how they're doing earlier, they may never get to that place where all of a sudden we're worried about whether they're going to take their life.
Right.
I will say this: if you ever are so worried about someone, don't hesitate, call 911. Okay? If you call 911 saying that you're worried about somebody being suicidal, whoever responds, whether it's the ambulance, police, if it's fire, if you're in your community, fire shows up, if EMS isn't able to show up right away, they are mandated to take that person in for evaluation. They may be released in 24 hours. They may be released the same night if but don't you I've seen too many people say I should have said something, and I didn't because I thought they were in a better place, or I never thought this is the biggest one. I never thought they'd do it.
Right.
We don't know, and so always err on the side of safety.
Right.
There are crisis centers. Almost every community in Bedford, it's Child and Family Services that has crisis. In Fall River, it's Corrigan.
Yeah.
There are Samaritans.
Yeah.
Their 800 number. They are one of the. They will call and just listen to people.
Right.
And that alone, just somebody's listening to me.
Yeah.
It's anonymous and everything else. But if they sense that somebody is about to do something, they're able to get help to the house.
Okay.
And I think I'll put out that National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. If you are in crisis, you can call 24/7, and it's 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-8255.
And the calls are confidential.
Calls are confidential. And in a few weeks, that number is going to change.
Okay.
Is that right?
It's going to change.
Okay.
The federal government has finally recognized that people need more assistance, and it's got to be easier. I don't always remember the 800 number.
Of course.
But just like an emergency is 911, suicide prevention is going to be 988.
That's wonderful.
That's great.
That
That's
is
great.
going to be happening. I believe it's July 16th
That's
is when the conversion
fabulous.
takes place.
Fabulous.
That's
Great. Thank you for that
So
information.
988
Yes.
around mid-July.
Yep.
So,
That's great. What a great move.
so Reverend Lima, we want to thank you, of course. This has been a really wonderful conversation. It definitely exceeded my expectations, although I had very high expectations. It went even above that. It was great. It was a lot of great information that you got out there. And I want to thank you for taking the time to speak to our audience. And of course, I want to thank Bay Coast Bank, who's our sponsor. Bay Coast Bank is right for all your financial needs. Visit baycoast.bank or call 508-678-7641 to learn more. And thank you for watching The 27 Degree with Chris and Nancy from 27 Degrees Consulting. Have a great day, everyone.